Eric from the Men Who Love God podcast. This is well overdue. You're in your fancy new studio. Eric, I want to hear about, and I think everyone should hear this story about how you set up the Men Who Love God podcast and what inspired it.
Okay, yeah. Setup is a good term. It was more like it was forced upon me and I accepted it.
Yeah.
I went through, so I'm a music composer. I live in Provo, Utah, and I own a stock music library. So I've done music professionally for, 12, 13 years. When COVID hit, it wasn't friendly to many, many businesses, including mine. And I found myself having a hard time financially and business wise. And as a man and a provider, that's really difficult to accept. It's like, this is my purpose. What's even the point if I can't do this? On top of that, my wife had some severe health problems that took her out. So she couldn't work either. And she was in bed for like a year and a half. And up to this point, I'd had a great life. I've been religious, my whole life. And I had a faith crisis a while ago, came out of it stronger than ever. Side note, I think everyone should have a faith crisis and and build a strong testimony. But during this time, the COVID years, I have journal entries that were like what's the point? Like I'm not fulfilling anything, and it was just really dark and full of despair. And looking back now, I realized that I was just being stripped. Like that's how Heavenly Father works, is he just strips you down. You can do it yourself, or you can have circumstance humble you. And I got to the point where I'm like, Heavenly Father, I believe you're there. I don't know what the plan is, but I'm going to stay true to you. And I had these just really heartfelt moments of like, I'm just going to do what you want me to do. And we got through COVID. As the clouds started parting after those years, you don't really see that you're out of it, but you just kind of slowly, things just start to get better. You get back into routine and life gets more normal. And then I remember during that time, this is the setup for why this podcast exists, but I remember feeling so alone in my struggles. I remember being at like elders quorum in church and loving the guys around me and knowing them, but just thinking like, do they feel the same way I do? Do they have issues? Do they feel inadequate? And even though I was physically present with a lot of men, and I just felt really isolated and alone, and I hated it. And I just remember feeling very adverse to that feeling, and this isn't right. So coming out of this experience, I was driving to California with my wife's from San Diego. We're going to go visit family. And one of the clearest downloads of revelation I've ever received, I don't think I've ever received words to my mind, but I got a revelation that said, now you're ready to talk. You're going to do a podcast called The Men Who Love God. It's to help men feel less alone in their struggles and to showcase good men living lives with the divine. Those two charges were put in there. Like that's the purpose of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds awful. I don't want to do anything new. I just want to get back into the flow and get comfortable again. But it kept nagging at me, and I couldn't deny that was from outside of me, and that was from God. And then a couple of days later, it might have been even the next day, I got a call from a friend who I hadn't talked in 8 to 10 years. And he was asking what I was doing, and he's a producer. And so I told him about all these cool music ideas I had, like all these cool projects I wanted to do. He didn't care about any of them. And then I got to the last thing, and I said, oh, and I have this podcast idea that I want to start. It's called The Men Who Love God. I told him what it's about. And he's like, okay, done. Let's do it. So he teamed up with me and brought all these resources that I didn't have. And together we've built The Men Who Love God. And it's a weekly podcast. And I interview men who are living lives with the divine, who have gone through horrendous things, and they're vulnerable. And I've learned that vulnerability is strength. This is what's the coolest thing, is like that truly is strength. I think as men, like we're kind of taught societally to just be strong, be the Rambo, be the survivor, be the man that doesn't need anything. But when we open up and are vulnerable, that gives like our fellow brothers permission to be like, oh my gosh, yes, I have that thing. And then we can bond and share. and grow. And so bringing these men on, and I'm just so grateful because they're really vulnerable, and we have real talk about real life. I mean, there's things that you might think are humiliating. I mean, men talking about overcoming pornography, divorce, job loss, suicidal thoughts, all this stuff that in years past were not really talked about much, but now we're bringing it to light and showing that there's a ton of good men out there that deal with this stuff, and they're looking to God, and miracles are happening, and it's giving courage to so many. And I'm just so grateful for the response. And one of my favorite things about this is I get so many messages from women, wives that are saying, thank you. I now understand my husband so much better. I appreciate his role. I appreciate what he's going through. And that just means so much to me, because whether men are listening or their wives are listening, if men are being appreciated more and understood, then I love that. And I think that's mission accomplished.
So many things to talk
Okay.
about. It is well done. I said this when you kindly hosted me for an episode. Is that
that was fun.
Well done on it. It's an incredible podcast. It really is. And I'm interested actually to ask though, what the difference is between what you feel the difference is between a podcast that could be The Men Who Love versus The Men Who Love God. You know, what's the faith aspect of that you've seen make a difference? Is it something to do with the strength underneath the vulnerability, is kind of relying on God? I'm very interested to hear your thoughts.
That's a great question. I think what sets this podcast apart is it's non-denominational. I mean, I'm a practicing member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I might have some unorthodox views. I mean, I wear a cross. I love having this reminder of my Savior. But I love the brotherhood of men who love God, of men who get strength outside of themselves, that look to a higher power. I think it's so cool, because when I see someone who boldly believes in God and a higher power, and it's not just about themselves, I get so much courage, because that's how I believe. And that's how men work. I think that's at least how I work, is when I see someone who is like William Wallace in Braveheart. We see someone who is willing to give their all for their belief, and unashamedly say, yeah, I believe in God and I struggle, but I believe in God and I love God and I try to do this and I fail every single day, but I continually get back up. That gives me so much courage. And so that's what I mean. Ultimately, this podcast was inspired by God, but me personally, I love the idea of spreading courage and letting men know their identity is they have divine identity and divine potential and divine worth. And it's palpable and it's real. And here's men that are living that life, and you can do it too. And it will bring peace and satisfaction and just a wholeness that other ways of life outside of God just can't bring.
Yeah, it's and we're going to get onto the identity bit, because I think that's really important. But it kind of, following on from your William Wallace analogy, one of my favorite scenes, I love what you said about, I'm interrupting myself, but this is how we form good, coherent thoughts in the end. I love what you say about the strength outside of ourselves. And one of my favorite ever scenes from a film is in Kenneth Branagh's Henry V. And they've just had the great battle, the great war, where Henry V is there, and at the end they're kind of walking around after victory, but sobered, not arrogant in victory, but humbled in victory, as they look across their kindred dead, one of which being a small young man who they all loved, played by Christian Bale, a young Christian Bale. And not Henry V, but someone else, but they pick up this boy and they walk him across the battlefield, all walking, and they start singing together the Knights Templar kind of motto that back in the day, not this strange, obscure kind of resurgence today, the modern Knights Templar, but non nobis domine sed tua gloriam. And it's essentially saying, not in my strength, but in God's strength, and the glory be to God. And it's exactly that. And it's a very popular song sung by orchestras, Non Nobis Domine. It's very powerful. And for me, it represents that whole idea of the power beyond ourselves, and being humble to and submitting to that power being the best thing for us and the most empowering thing. But for you, having interviewed so many of these men, what are the lessons you've learned mainly, and the common patterns of what men are experiencing, but also the results of their faith and submitting to that?
Yeah, man, there's really so much. I think some of my favorite common themes is the absolute essentialness. I don't think that's a word, but the absolute importance of having a willing heart and how far a willing heart can get you. And what I mean by this is there's men who go through life, um, and I think men are naturally not as open to ideas sometimes. We kind of get in the ways that work, and it's always worked this way. And so we're not naturally inclined to be open to just new things, and entertain new concepts. And that's not for everyone, but I'm saying generally this, and this is for me how it has been. But the power of a willing heart through trial, through wanting to know more, through being open to accepting the Savior's help, does so much that we don't even see how much it does. I mean, it bridges any chasm. That's what Christ asked for. That's what God asked for, is a willing heart, and the being willing to, like, even if I don't if I don't believe something, just help me want to believe, or help me. I'm willing to believe, and meet me there. And what I've seen with these men who were reaching for help, God always reaches back. I mean, every single time. And it might take longer, and it might not look how you expected it, but the grace of God is all encompassing, and that willing heart saves families, saves marriages, saves people from addiction. And it's just that willing heart, the open heart, contrite spirit concept. And so that's one thing that I've seen, is the lack of pride, being humble. And let me think about another thing. Oh, another thing that's very common is men go through very similar things. I mean, we all struggle from lust, we struggle from laziness, we struggle from gluttony. We have, numbing. We all have our favorite sin. We all have our favorite comfort that keeps us from communing with God fully. And that's why we're here. And that's why Jesus Christ exists, and so it's okay. It's okay that these things happen and exist. And that's the point, is to overcome them through Christ. And so it's more like, it's the journey. It's not we ever arrive somewhere, but it's the journey and the quest to strip away our pride and let Christ just be in us, in our identity. And so I've just seen so much commonality. No matter what the problem is, it's the solution is the same, which is Christ.
Do you think that's partly why us men can sometimes feel quite lonely, even in these communal settings, because we kind of have our own issues, as everyone does, and we kind of think we're alone in it.
Yeah.
And there's a shame to that. There's I look around all these great men in Elders Quorum, and it's like, man, I wish I could be like them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're just constantly comparing, and I'm sure everyone does this. Not just men.
That's what I've learned, though. It's like, we've had men on pedestals, like people that we think are great, and they don't have problems. Yes, they do. They have problems. They struggle with all the same things we do. And so just having the courage to accept your struggle and the talking of it with others is so powerful. And so I think I had like these three ideas that I've learned, is like, vulnerability is strength, isolation is a killer, figuratively and literally, and then true masculinity with God is anything but toxic. Those are the three like big takeaways that I've learned that have changed my life through talking to these men.
That's amazing. Those three are great. In fact, on that last point of toxic masculinity,
yeah,
we've heard the phrase bunged around, and I wonder what your thoughts on kind of the difference between, is there a difference between what the world sees as toxic masculinity and the natural man? Like, is there any truth to toxic masculinity, or do you feel like those two concepts are completely different and kind of one's more healthy to observe than the other?
I hope I can phrase this right. In my mind, it makes sense. I think it's so important to know that masculinity, in its true sense, like isn't toxic. In fact, it's created and designed by God. Masculinity protects women and children. Masculinity, um, true masculinity, makes you a teacher. It makes you want to create safe spaces for women and children. It makes you want to be better, to be strong physically, mentally, spiritually. Toxic masculinity would be when you're not living in real masculinity. So if you're not caring for other people and you're just seeking out pleasure, and if you're a man not taking responsibility, not building, not being a part of society, not protecting, then you're not doing what you're supposed to. And then those attributes, whatever toxic max, however you want to define it, is the opposite, the antithesis of the true masculinity. And so, yeah, I mean, like when the men that go out and talk about just how to, sleep with as many people as possible, make a ton of money, and just live these very indulgent lives, it's very easy to say, oh, because it's very broadcasted. So yes, masculinity is toxic. That's toxic masculinity. And yeah, I can see why that is toxic masculinity. But what my point is, again, the masculinity that God has provided and modeled, Christ modeled for us as the exemplar, is anything but. It's lifting up the needed, the needy, the poor, the hungry. It's protection. It's building a society that cares for the underprivileged and just lifting, right? Because we're physically stronger, and so symbolically we have we can put more on our shoulders. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think when men are in practicing and living true masculinity, they feel fulfilled, and then the other problems that they have can fall away because they're not hiding anything. They're living their purpose. And I think it's really beautiful and important to establish that the real masculinity is our purpose. And it helps everyone, men, women, and children.
It's funny that because of that term becoming in pop culture, I almost feel guilty and kind of selfish taking up an episode on the podcast to discuss masculinity. Even the word itself has kind of an ick associated with it, which kind of speaking to you makes me feel sad about that, because it's like this is a good conversation, this is a healthy conversation, but there's kind of that, and I do think there is a level of unhealthiness in the term compared to the natural man, because the natural man tells us you can overcome this through Christ. This natural, the desires within you and the different things and facets of that, whereas the toxic masculinity just kind of points to you and tells you that you're bad, and
you're inherently bad. Oh, you're a man.
Yeah.
You can't talk. You can't explain things. You're a man. You don't know our experience. So if you shut up, if you shame a whole half of the population to confuse them about what their true identity is and their roles that will fulfill them and others, then toxicness will just flourish everywhere. There's toxic femininity, toxic masculinity. And I think that when we step outside of the identity of what we truly are and latch onto what society feeds us and confuses us with, then the toxicity is everywhere.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there. And my sister, bless her, she came home from, and they would never have taught this when I was at school, but she came home from school one day with homework from religious studies class. And in religious studies class, they had taught her, and this is in my eyes, this is groundbreaking stuff. Like, why isn't this on the headlines in shock? That the symbol of Jesus Christ on the cross was a symbol of toxic masculinity, and that was shocking to me. My religious studies lessons were nowhere near that. It was learning the beautiful facets of all different faiths around the world, and she came home with this. This homework. And so, I mean, Well, it would be good to have your reaction to that, but also I'd love
I
to
mean,
ask you
I mean,
from that.
it's sad and absurd, and I'm not surprised with the way things are going. That the more
Yeah.
you can shame, seriously, it's like if you want to tear apart the family and confuse people, you take away their identity, and anything that makes that identity good, you twist it and tell them they're bad if they have those like immutable desires and qualities. So I'm not surprised, but that really is sad that happened. That's
How to you is Jesus an illustration and an example of divine masculinity?
oh man, Jesus is the best.
There we go.
There's so yeah, there's
End
just
episode.
yeah, period. There's so many layers to Christ and his teachings in his life. I mean, to me, he's always he fed people physically and spiritually. He was always feeding, like he was providing. He was never and another thing too that I love is he would weep. He had feelings, he had
Mm.
emotions, and he like met people where they were. He wasn't standoffish and judged them for feeling different than he did, or if he was never uncomfortable with how someone else felt. He was always cool with it. It didn't change his identity to go with someone who's saying something blasphemous, or or if they were sad because Lazarus died, or he was always set. He was always so strong with who he was. He knew who he was. He was never afraid to just be with others how they were, and then because of that, they could feel his love, and most of them wanted to follow him and felt warm. So I think as a father, those are some qualities that I want to have. Like with my children, I'm learning now that they're not going to do what I want to do, what I think they should do all the time, and they're going to live these lives that that I might not agree with some of the choices, but I'm going to do my best to model Christ, where I know I'm a son of God, and I know that they're children of God, and I know that Christ has them in their arms, and I'm going to love them and be with them where they are, and always be constant for them. Just like when Peter fell, looking at Christ on the water, he was steady the whole time, even though Peter fell. Like that's an example of just being steady, and we're not going to do it perfect, and that's the point. Is we need Christ. We're not going to do it perfect, but the model of it is there, and seeking after that does fulfill men and fulfill me. So those are some examples of pure masculinity, and then also the atonement of being able to put the burden of everything on our shoulders. Like even though we may not have the capacity to take all of the burdens in our lives, Christ will make up for that, and he does. But us being willing to sacrifice for our family, take a job that we think is below us, go out and if you have an argument with your wife, like go and apologize and be humble, and just be someone that you can take burdens on, put more on your shoulders, and then Christ will make up the rest of it. But that model of following that is very beautiful and motivating to me.
That is, and like you say, we could spend hours digging apart all the intricacies and nuances of how Jesus Christ provides an example for men. We could,
Yeah.
and women, and
And
everyone.
that's what's so
Uh,
cool. It's women and children too. It's like every single person can see the proper way to live through him, masculine, feminine. It's beautiful. That's why he's the best.
Precisely. And I wonder if what would be your response to, say there are elders quorum presidents who are listening to this. What would be your advice for them for creating a community in elders quorum where the men can be vulnerable with each other and open, and also kind of you know realize that potential, and feel good about their opportunities as men.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so interesting. This is such a hard thing because I think culturally in the church, we're used to just following the manual and talking about surface level stuff. And it's beautiful. The doctrine's beautiful. There's nothing wrong with it. But there's many men and they're sitting there like they know they're supposed to be there, but they're struggling. And they're there, and that's great, but they're not getting much out of it and they're not connecting. So as an elders quorum president, my advice would be, and it's way easier said than done, is you have to be vulnerable first. You have to say, I've struggled with this. Anyone else struggle with this? That's number one. And number two, you have to be ready to accept that it won't be received well the first couple times. you might not get responses because no one's used to this. Just because you walk up and say, hey guys, I struggle with pornography, or I struggle with this or that, you might not get the warm reception in the conversations yet. But I promise you, someone in that room is like, okay, this is getting real, and breaking down the barriers of that, of us, breaking down the barriers of whatever to get to realness will pay off. And my what I know now is I've held meetings with men, like we get together at night and we talk about stuff, and I know now
Yeah.
that it is worth it. That's the thing, it is worth it. Even though it's really hard and awkward to talk about stuff and talk about real things, it is always worth it, and you're always going to leave feeling better if you opened up. Just like the principle of confession, and it's not that you have to, not that you're confessing, but the principle of speaking truth to things that are hard lifts a burden, and you feel so much better. You will never. I love when Jordan Peterson says, "Tell the truth, and whatever happens is the best thing that can happen. Like the outcome is the best thing that can possibly happen." I mean, you could be like, "Oh, well, what if my family's disappointed?" Or what? Well, no, it is the best. I think it's true. It is the best thing that could happen because truth was said, and you're clearing the air, and you're making room for Christ to enter your heart because you're being humble and having less pride. So, as an Elders Quorum president, I would say set the example. Know that it is worth it for the people that you have stewardship over to have real conversations and to do real healing and real connection, and have faith that Christ will carry you through it, no matter how hard it is. That would be my advice.
That's beautiful. I do think there's a fantastic opportunity to really be conscious about building that quorum unity together. I think it has potential to be really powerful and impactful. And I mean, there are so many things in the organization of the church and how it's run, and if you're raised in the church, how you're raised, that are beneficial to learning kind of healthy things. And I wonder from that, actually, if in your experience, how has church and the opportunity to hold the priesthood helped you as a man?
Yeah, that's a great question. What the priesthood does for me, and I love that my wife asks for blessings quite often, because it makes me want to live a higher standard to be worthy to give blessings at any time. I think that's really important for that structure, for men to know that you're going to be expected to be called upon often when it's inconvenient, and to be able to bless lives through Christ, you need to be ready for it. I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think also someone could look at it and be like, and say that's a really hard thing, and maybe shame themselves that they're not always feeling worthy to execute priesthood ordinances or do those things. But if you are continually humbling yourself and asking Christ for help in your life, the priesthood becomes the source of power and duty that elevates you. I think it elevates me and makes me take my life more seriously. And so I love that. That's what I love about covenants too, is it makes you take things more seriously. It's like, it's a heightened law that, once again, I don't live perfectly. No one lives perfectly, but it is that heightened law that we're continually invited. And that invitation is sweet and full of grace. And God's just waiting for us and helping us the whole time. So the priesthood has, once again, I think it's just elevated my duties and my seriousness in my roles as a father and husband and member of the congregation.
Yeah, it's shocking to me that the group of people with the highest suicide rates at the moment are the middle-aged men, men in their 50s. It's a terrible shame, and perhaps they feel somewhat disenfranchised from society. But then I look at the opportunity that I have in this world where there is a clear dearth of meaning, to hold the priesthood and to be given a framework of responsibilities and instructions. I really value practical instructions for how I can serve and get stuck in, and gosh, I don't know where I would be without that ecosystem that the church and God has provided me with.
I mean, just go back to your sister. I mean, if you did not have the church and you got a lesson from an authoritative figure at a school saying that Christ on the cross is a symbol of toxic masculinity, I mean, that could show you where you might be going if you held that person in regard and didn't have anything else to tell you any different. I mean, that's what we're seeing. And so that's the whole thing about the gospel of Jesus Christ is you know your identity. Once you know your identity and you really latch onto it and keep reminding yourself of it and keep the covenants and taking the sacrament and doing the things that God's asked you to do, your identity is renewed, and that's where the power comes from, and that's where you can have courage and and hopefully pass that on to others. And I think that's the purpose of it.
And you see that those without that path to a true fulfilling identity are seeking it in the kind of personifications of people and characters like Andrew Tate and
Yeah.
the kind of Tommy Shelby from Peaky Blinders and Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. The kind
Yeah.
of looking to these as kind of this is the lone wolf kind of, I can do this, and uh, the they always find that identity and that path falls short of what we have so abundantly in Jesus Christ and the gospel and all those figures from the scriptures. It's quite remarkable, isn't it, that what
Yeah.
we have, the richness of the material. And I just you've mentioned identity quite a lot, and I would love for you to dig into that, discovering your identity as a male and aligning with that. Could you share your thoughts on
Yeah.
identity and what you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the problems that I've had in my life are when I drift and I'm not thinking about my identity or don't have a connection to what it is. I had a really cool experience a couple months ago where I was in some sort of meditation practice, but I had this realization that I could see that Eric, was created with so much love by my heavenly parents. Like, it was indescribable. I could see myself as a little kid and how delighted they were in me, and like the light and the love, and just like they were so, like, my creation was so filled with light. And then I realized that's how we were all created. We were all created in a way that our heavenly parents are delighted. They love our unique attributes, even ones that society might not love or that we feel shame for. But you were created in a certain way, and feeling that love of my heavenly parents in the last couple months has really like helped me understand that living from that identity as divine beings changes your heart and actions. Like, I'm slower to anger. I'm slower to be judgmental of other people who I don't think are doing what they should. I'm slower to be critical of my kids, of my wife. I just feel softer. And so if we can live in our identity and be bold about it, and that's the purpose of the podcast, be bold in our identity of men who love God. Like, we are not ashamed to say we are sons of God, sons of the one true King, and we we're imperfect, but this is who we are, and we're bold about it, and we'll talk about it openly. I mean, I get so many men saying, "Thank you for this podcast. Thank you for showing these men. Thank you for giving me strength and helping me feel heard." And I'm confident that other men are becoming more bold in their lives and are latching onto their true identity. And I think that's the solve. That's the balm that could help our society, is us knowing our true identity. Then a lot of issues go out the window. All the gender issues, all the political issues. It's not like we're not divided anymore. I'm a divine son of God. As soon as I say, like, oh, I'm a Republican or Democrat, then I've like separated myself from half of the country. That's just an example. But what I'm saying is, like, if we start identifying culturally or what system I agree with or what sports team, then we start dividing and separating and judging, and then we're not living that in that delight that we were created in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does.
Okay.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it does. Yeah, it's the more. So we had an episode 2 weeks ago with Dr. Andrew Skinner about the doctrine, the restored doctrine, I would say, of becoming like God, becoming lowercase g gods, and it's quite a remarkable doctrine. It's quite strange as well for a Brit. We're traditionally self-deprecating,
Yeah.
so to talk realistically of our potential to become gods is quite frankly uncomfortable, and I'm sure it is for everyone. But the more we come to understand the nature of God the Father and our heavenly parents, the more remarkable it is that we are sons and daughters of that. And it is not a doctrine that makes you feel guilty and turn away from the challenges and opportunities of becoming like him. It is a doctrine that raises your vision every day. I remember I said this to him too, the most productive days of my life are the ones where I feel the testimony burning in me that this time is a time for men to prepare to meet God and understanding this probationary period and making the most of it. And I just think that is such a wonderful doctrine. But it's true, we have a divine identity, and we throw that term around so much that when you actually stop to think about it, it is quite remarkable as a doctrine, isn't it?
It's true. Yeah. I mean, we sing this, I am a child of God. And like, yeah, it's said so much that it becomes bland in a way. But I think that if you were to ask for, I think it's really powerful if you asked Heavenly Father how he feels about you. Like, say, how do you feel about me? What do you like? What do you like about me? And be open to that. And I'm pretty confident you're going to have an experience that will solidify your knowledge of our Heavenly Mother's and Father's love and appreciation and celebration of you in all of your quirks. I love humanity. I remember walking out of the Freddie Mercury movie a couple years ago, the Queen movie, Bohemian Rhapsody, and it's just such a wild movie. I mean, there's so much that goes on, and
That
his
film was the
the film.
first film I watched back from my mission. So
Oh,
I
that's
was just
awesome.
released from a missionary, and then my family were like, "You got to watch this," and I watched it, and I was like, "Goodness me, what?"
It's, I mean,
It was
it's
going into the deep end.
It is. It goes to the deep end, but it's so. But that's the thing is like that's the scope of humanity: artistic expression, struggle, identity. And I walked out just with this love of humanity, and I felt like that God, like I felt like a small glimpse of how God must just love the quirkiness and all of the crazy stuff that all the art we make and all of the things that we get into that seemingly aren't important, but He created us, and we have like hobbies, and we have interests, and we have weird talents, and we get to like explore those and build things and become co-creators with God. And I think that he's more delighted in a in weird subgenres of art and music than we would think. I don't think he just cares about the hymns. I think he celebrates us in all of the things that we care about. I just really believe that, and I love humanity, and I love celebrating it, and so I just think the more I think about how God views us, and me being a father helps me do that. I think that He's more accepting and celebrates more than we think He does, and I really love that view of Him.
It's a wonderful point. I've never really thought of it that way before, especially with the quirkiness of individuals and
Yeah,
embracing kind of our strangeness, our
yeah,
peculiarity,
it's weird stuff.
individuals.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm like, did God really bless me with the talent of playing the Irish tin whistle, Lord
yeah,
of the Rings theme tune on it? And
yeah.
actually,
I bet He thinks that's cool. I bet He loves that. So I have a son.
no one thinks that's cool,
I think
surely.
I think it's cool.
Thank you.
So my son is 11, and I grew up playing sports. I was just like a sports all the time. He doesn't care about sports at all. He like tries it. He's like fine, but he's just like this kind of a weird artsy kid. My wife and I joke we have no idea what he's going to do in life. And I think that's like we kind of can predict what our daughters will do, but he's this like wild card. And I've just learned to love and just be excited for what's going to happen. And once again, I'm bringing it back. I think that's what God does for us. It's excited to be there when we fall, because He's going to be there to lift us. Like He doesn't want us to go through pain, but He knows pain's necessary. It's going to happen to all of us, whether we deserve it or not. But He knows that is growth, and He is confident because His grace is there. He's waiting to bless us. And I just think the plan is so beautiful. The family structure of us being divine children, and then replicating that somewhat on earth here.
Yeah.
imperfectly, but it gives us that chance to serve and build our masculinity and our feminine, and celebrate those energies. It's a beautiful thing.
Properly understood, it brings meaning and a zest for life.
Right. Right.
I do believe that. And following on from that,
Okay.
um, the and speaking of kind of divine parents, the role of men in the family today. Could you kind of give us an analysis of where we're at in contrast to the family proclamation, perhaps, and you know your advice to men listening
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
would like more direction with how they can play a significant role in their family unit.
Yeah. I know this is unpopular, but I think feminism has not been a great thing for men and women both. I think that
When you say, could you be specific
yeah,
about feminine? Are you talking kind of
specifically like
third wave feminism? Or...
third way, like equal rights. I totally agree with all that kind of stuff. Like that's a no brainer. It's the idea that women, um, they want to be they want to be like men. They bag on men for their traits, but they want to be the provider. They want to be independent. They want to be the lone rangers. They want to get the career and spend time giving their best years to a boss as opposed to getting married and raising children. And so I think that one, it's and studies have shown that women now are more unhappy than they've ever been, and they have more, I mean, what you would call freedom to or encouragement to go live your best life, whatever you want to call that. So they're more unhappy now than ever. The birth rate's declining. There's people are getting married less. The family is just not a priority in society anymore. And so what this does to men is men are like, well, I have these natural inclinations to find a woman. I want to raise a family, but society says, um, well, women are going to go get jobs. They're going to have careers. And so by the time families are being formed, you're in your mid 30s a lot of times, and then there's not as much time to have children or build families. The roles get confused because men don't know what to do because they want to be the provider. And I've even experienced this in my marriage. There was a time where my wife was making a lot more money than me, and I felt like, well, what's my purpose? And so I spent more time with the kids, which was awesome. And so I'm not saying that was a bad or good thing, but it was like I noticed that, oh, I wasn't the main provider, and I kind of lost my sense of identity. And so when that's not even there at all, where I'm not providing, it's like she makes more than me, and we don't have kids. It's just really confusing. And so I don't think feminism, third wave specifically, has served us well, and that's why men are struggling, and that's why there's a lot of men who are suicidal. They are living with their parents. They've given up on dating. They play video games. Porn addiction's at an all-time high. And so we're seeing the cracks in society because of what I would call like anti-family movement.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah. And I know it's unpopular to say this, but I'm getting more bold, and I'm like, well, this is happening, and I think this is the truth, and we need to speak to it. We need to speak to gender roles and families. I mean, that's the building block of our society. And if it's cracking and falling apart, what's doing it? Let's look at it, and let's try and fix it. And that's kind of where I want to go in the future is educating and learning more about this, and encouraging people to follow the plan that God has set up for the family. I think that's where the most happiness can be achieved.
No, we had a similar discussion in our episode a few weeks ago about the Harrison Butker speech that went viral about those traditional values.
Kansas City Chiefs.
Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah, that's right. And I don't think you need to apologize for it being unpopular, though. And I think maybe the unpopularity comes from a misunderstanding of the position and the kind of the view that it subjugates women. And I would love to speak to a woman about that on the podcast. I'll have to think about that. But, there was some interesting anthropological studies. Well, actually, it was on animals about hunter-gatherers, and that actually the ancient female hunter-gatherers were as competent or more competent than the males at hunting, and would hunt. They would hunt. However, the men insisted on hunting and did it specifically to attract and impress the females. So I think that's it's funny, but it's an important distinction to make, that in no way does it discount the talents and the abilities of women when we say it, but it's that kind of funny, like it was to impress and it was to kind of, I don't know what I'm getting at there, but I
No,
just
no,
find it
that's
really
interesting. I
interesting.
mean, that's one of the arguments is like, yeah, obviously women are smarter than men in a lot of ways. Like, there's no doubt that women are totally capable of doing amazing things. The question is society going to flourish if they go to work and have careers, or do women raise the next generation with all of the gifts that they have? I mean, there's a lot of, and this is anecdotal, but there are women that regret not having children and doing that
Of
and having
course, yeah.
careers, right? And so there's something to that, and there's something to the fact that women are more nurturing. I mean, they just naturally are. It's a biological fact, and they have so much. I mean, women are amazing. I feel like I'm trying to build them up. I'm not even trying to like say like, oh, you should be happy in that role. I'm just saying that Heavenly Father set up the family in a certain way for a reason, and now that we've gone away from that, we're seeing what happens, and we're seeing the results and the fallout, and the unhappiness and the unfulfilled, dreams and potential families that are lost.
There's
So,
a good YouTube channel called Baggage Claim that's kind of a pop culture analyzing movies channel, and she did an interesting take following the new Lord of the Rings series, Rings of Power,
oh, that
as
was
well
rough.
as the
Ugh, I watched 2 episodes. And I'm like, this is too bad. Can't do it.
I enjoyed it, but I think I went in not thinking that this is going to be a Peter Jackson Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings. Um, it was written by a member of the church,
Was it
in
really?
a member in London.
Oh, wow.
Interesting, I think. Yeah. So, um, but also of the kind of onslaught of Marvel action films as well. She was analyzing the female characters, and I apologize, women listening, for staying on the subject of women. We will get back to men, which is what we're more qualified about. But she was interestingly pointing out that Hollywood was producing role models that girls struggled to look up to because they were just they were more masculine than the men, so that it would look empowering when actually it wasn't empowering. It was completely unrelatable,
Yeah.
kind of emotionless, just go out to war and lead the men to war. And it's like, I see what you're doing, but the girls that were being surveyed were like, I mean, it's a fun film, but I would love to see a female role model that's actually relatable to me and like how I live and how my brain works. But anyway,
Are you saying the women who were reviewing the film or watching the film said they would like to see someone relatable? Or
yeah,
you're saying, yeah, the women,
no,
because
the women did. The women
yeah,
did.
because Galadriel's not relatable. She's like a cold-hearted killer running around emotionless. I mean, she's
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah. And so yeah,
Where's the maternal aspect of Galadriel that's in the books? And anyway,
yeah,
not to nerd people out,
yeah. That's a good point.
but back onto men. What's your advice for men in the family? If you were to give practical strategies based on the men you've interviewed of faith to lead
Yeah.
a family that is God fearing and create that environment in the home.
Okay. Well, first of all, I do this very imperfectly, but I'll tell you what I do and what I've learned from others. Okay, so I've learned it's essential that men have to be physically healthy, spiritually healthy, and mentally healthy. There needs to be like if we're going to fulfill our roles, our God given roles as a father and a husband and a person in the community that serves, you have to have a physical body. So we need to be working out. We need to be eating right. We need to be in the Word. You have to be in the Word to know Jesus. You have to know His Word. You can't just like have this. We just read in Alma, King Lamoni said, we believed in the Great Spirit, and we believed that whatever we did was right. And I think that we tend to do that sometimes, where we're like, oh, it feels right. I think God's cool with this, and so God's really tolerant. So this is all good. And I think that that's a huge mistake that we can get into. But being in the Word, so we're spiritually strong and then mentally strong, reading books, having discussions, listening to podcasts, getting outside of your routine to experience the world so you can be knowledgeable, to be able to serve. I interviewed Trevor Farnes. He's the CEO of Mountain Ops, and he has this amazing episode. But one thing that I love that he did, and I've actually implemented the change in my life, is the first thing he does is he gets on his knees and he prays in the morning. And that, a lot of you might do that, but for a while now, I go straight to the gym and then I come back and then I read and pray. But he said, me giving that physical showing of God that he's first really sets the tone for the day. And so that's what I've started now, is like, I will pray and have a spiritual practice before I do anything else, like showing God, like, this is my physical showing that you're first. So I don't know that we need, that's what I love, is like, if we want to honor our creator, is we honor ourselves by cultivating a strong mind, body, and spirit. And so that's what I would suggest. It doesn't need to be more complex than that, because if we're in the word with God first thing and we're keeping physically and mentally strong, I think other things will fall into place. We'll be open to inspiration, and able to serve. And I hope that's helpful, but I feel strongly about those things.
Those are all great things. And on the flip side of that, how would you advise people who are not at that place but would like to get there and are in a rut and finding it hard to even, even the thought of doing those things is overwhelming? What would you say to them?
Well, I'd say be careful of shame, and don't think that you need to like have a crazy workout if you're unhealthy and like change everything drastically. In fact, if you start changing everything drastically, you're going to fall back into old habits. And so, you can do all things through Christ. And so I would ask Christ to say, hey, I want to make some changes, and I know you love me, and I know you know what changes I should make. And what are some things that I can do to change today that will help? And I need your help. So always having Christ lead and back you up would be my advice. And I think I don't want to tell you what to do, except don't do anything extremely drastic, because studies have shown that doesn't really stick. But keep Christ as your exemplar. And if we're truly trying to follow him, I think, and we're latched into our identity, we naturally want to take care of our bodies, minds, and spirits.
These are like the Andrew Huberman protocols, but for leading a faithful home.
There you go. Yeah.
I want to, following from that.
I have one more thing.
Go for it.
This is really important, and especially as we're fathers, kids don't care what you say; they care what you do. So when you're getting physically fit, when you're studying the scriptures, when you're reading and doing these things and strengthening those, they will care. They'll notice, as opposed to like telling them what they should do and we're not doing it. So I think if you're worried about your kids, there's nothing better than you can do than just being the person that you want them to follow.
Yeah, beautiful. And speaking of scriptures, I've got 2nd Nephi open here, and I'd love to go through a few verses with you, Eric, and get your thoughts and impressions on it. I take this from an old talk by Elder Carlos Essay, who kind of introduced me to how 2nd Nephi 1 provides a good framework for masculinity. It's Lehi speaking to his sons, exhorting them, and I'll go to 2nd Nephi 1:21 first. And now that my soul might have joy in you, and that my heart might leave this world with gladness because of you, that I might not be brought down with grief and sorrow to the grave, arise from the dust, my sons, and be men, and be determined in one mind and in one heart, united in all things, that ye may not come down into captivity. Then I'll go back to verse 13. Oh, that ye would awake from a deep sleep, yea, even from the sleep of hell, and shake off the awful chains by which ye are bound, which are the chains which bind the children of men, that they are carried away captive down to the eternal gulf of misery and woe. And then I would go back to 23 and 24. Awake, my sons, put on the armour of righteousness, shake off the chains with which ye are bound, and come forth out of obscurity, and arise from the dust. Rebel no more against your brother, whose views have been glorious, and who hath kept the commandments from the time that we left Jerusalem, and who hath been an instrument in the hands of God in bringing us forth into the land of promise. For were it not for him, we must have perished with hunger in the wilderness. Nevertheless, ye sought to take away his life, yea, and he hath suffered much sorrow because of you. And I think there's also, I know these are events that actually happened, but it's kind of a little allegory for the relationship with the self as a man as well. And I just think there are a few things in there that kind of, Lehi calls his sons to be men. And the instructions that go along with his exhortation to be men, a few things of be determined in one mind, united in all things, put on the armor of righteousness, shake off the chains, interestingly, come forth out of obscurity and arise from the dust, but also awake from a deep sleep, the sleep of hell, and shake off the awful chains by which you are bound, that you won't be carried away captive. And those are a few things that I just think are so interesting, specifically that they were mentioned. What do you think of those, Eric?
Well, I think that is a very poetic part of the Book of Mormon. Like the language is really beautiful and conjures like beautiful. It's just beautiful. One thing that I like about that a lot is the awake, arise, awake, arise. He says that multiple times, and it's like the natural man is at a baseline, fulfilling base desires, and he's calling us. And I feel this right now. There's kind of a zeitgeist. There's like a movement of men waking up. They're seeing the state of the world, and they're realizing it's out of control. And so they're looking for answers. They're looking for commonality of people who believe the same. And so I feel like right now there is an awakening of men, and they are looking to stand up, awake, arise, and locking into to that divine goodness that's inside of them. And so, yeah, I love that language. I think it's great. I think that could be the mantra for men, like all of us. Be united. What are we united in? We're united in Christ. He's the exemplar. I mean, as long as we stick to Christ and have that one, going back to the willing heart, and not have taking Christ how we want to take him, but being totally willing to take Christ as he is, we will be united. That's really beautiful. So I really like those verses. Thank you.
I mean, there are so many parallels that you can add to modern society too. I was thinking earlier on before we spoke about what does his instruction to come forth out of obscurity mean? In the context of, he says that straight after telling them to be men and be united and be determined, come forth out of obscurity. And the thought that I had was the service and getting involved and being a light to the world, and the importance of that, especially in today's day and age where we're kind of, I feel like men in general are retreating slightly, but it's like in God and with the principles that you've learned through your faith and with humility and meekness, come forth out of obscurity. Let those unique things that are given to you as a man shine forth and do good. And that may mean something different for other people. That may mean spiritually leading in your home, come forth out of obscurity and taking a back seat and spiritually lead. For some, it may mean get into politics or do something in the community, go and do something. It might mean do well in your job, don't just sit there and take this for granted. Do something. And I find that very interesting with the kind of what we know about the psyche of masculinity and the kind of desire that we all have to keep going and pushing for more. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's the coming out of obscurity is a fascinating idea. I think there's a lot of nuance to it, but I my thought was that right now, the men or the people that make a stand for goodness and truth, they stick out like a sore thumb almost. We kind of know we know the celebrities who are Christians, right? Like there's always the list of the one-offs of the people who still believe or whatever. But I think that if we are bound to Christ, we're going to be forced out of obscurity, because when you're with Christ, you're not afraid of you're less afraid of consequences. You're less afraid of public humiliation. You're less afraid of what the world thinks of you. And so Christ naturally brings us. It's like this. It's like this podcast for me. I never wanted to do this. I'm not a good speaker. I don't think that I talk well.
Same. It's
Yeah,
funny
it's like
that, isn't it? We
like
both feel the
I
same
want
about
to
that.
do this, but God brought me out of obscurity, and now I'm talking to men, and I'm talking to you on this podcast, and my network has grown dramatically in the last couple of years. And I feel like I've been brought out of obscurity because I had a willing heart, even though I didn't want to. I still said yes. I'll do this anyway, and He cleared the path for me. So, yeah, I think naturally we will be brought out of obscurity more and more because Christ will tell us what to do, and we're going to have the courage to do it.
That's an interesting point, that being forced out of obscurity. I sometimes feel that way in different aspects as well.
Yeah.
Going on from Lehi, who are some of the men in scriptures and in maybe church leadership and your own life that have inspired you the most in your faith and your relationship with God?
Oh, that's a great question.
And if you have any, I know you're on the spot, but if you have any specific experiences that might illustrate that.
Yeah, man, I want to think more about that. I mean, I've always had an affinity for Joseph Smith, and
yeah,
what a wild life, man. Yeah, I had a cool experience with him. I had a faith crisis in like 2014. I'm not going to get into it, but I eventually went out to Sharon, Vermont, where he was born, and I stood where the little plot where it says Joseph Smith was born here, December 23rd, 1805. And I had such an overwhelming like feeling from Heavenly Father of the love He had for Joseph. And it was this like soothing, incredible balm for me in my testimony. I just respect him so much because he had very little comfort in his life. There's very little times where he could, I imagine, just lay back and breathe and just relax. He was always trying to start, restore the church and receive revelation and escape the mob and building societies. I mean, I just respect him so much. I think that he was able to do what he did because of Christ. He had to rely on that, and that's the people I look up to the most. I like the story of Job, where he still said, I acknowledge that you're God, and even though the worst things that could happen happened to him. I really like those stories of men who have lost everything, but they still held on to God. In my own small way, that's what I went through with my wilderness hard years of COVID. Is I felt like I lost everything, but I said, you know what, I'm still going to stick with you, even though it doesn't feel like you're here. So I really respect those type of stories where it feels like all is lost, but then God does once again show His arm.
Mm-hmm. We have so many examples of great men. Even it's interesting growing up. I was blessed with many great role models and mentors in my life who probably didn't know they were mentors, but I looked up to them greatly, and it really resonated with me when I spoke with Brad Wilcox on the podcast and was asking him about role models, and he said, "Don't just take the lowest hanging fruit of role models that society pops up for you, and that the world pedestalizes." He said, because you'll always find it quite hollow, and you'll always find they fall short. However, when you look at the people closest to you, that's when, and I might be paraphrasing this, but you get the gist of it, is that's when you find really fulfilling role models and mentor figures, when you can see people close to you and the people who live their faith day by day, who make mistakes, who show up time and time again, and sometimes fall short. And he was specifically referring to like men in elders quorum. Look at those people and say, and those are much greater and much more satisfying role models and mentors than the random people who you get a glimpse of their outward facing front. And that really resonated with me in this world where so often, as a consequence of different things going on, some random guy shows up as sort of this culmination of societal issues, and we all look to them and go, "Yeah, I want to listen to what he says and do what he says."
I think that's a great point. I have some guys in my congregation that I look up to so much who really are walking with Christ. And now that I'm thinking about that, I really do look to them when I take my family to church. I'm like, that's the brother I want to be. I want to follow. Like, that's the guy I would follow into battle. My dad is that way. So I really do think there are those people around us, and it's nice because they're living. I mean, I love the founding fathers, but they can't talk to me. I can read their biographies, but it's nice to like talk to and see and interact with mentors in your congregation or community. So I think also it's just part of being grateful and saying, Heavenly Father, who are those around me? I'm grateful for these people around me. Thank you for them. Help me to see their goodness and what I can learn from them. And there's mentors all around us. I think that's a great point. So thanks for bringing that up.
No, I just think the things I've learned about covenants in the last several months, as I've kind of turned my study towards that, I just feel so grateful when I look around my ward and others, that we're connected through covenant, and there's a covenant belonging there for the taking as you get a part of this community. And as you said before about building consciously a community of that in Elders Quorum, for example, or for the women listening in Relief Society, understanding that, yes, I am bound to God through covenant, but also being a spirit child of them. I'm bound to my wife and my family through law, through priesthood power, and through love, bound through love, and all those things, and family by blood, But then you look at the people around your ward, and you're like, I'm bound to these by covenant. That's a great connection, and it's one that we shouldn't take for granted, and can really help us as men and women as others in becoming better in a holistic, healthy, good way, and knowing how to improve. But Eric, final word on this. What would you leave for the men listening? A key message to take away.
There's nothing better than a clear conscience. There's nothing better than stepping into the role and the delight that Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother created for us, for you. And your heart, that's usually what's stopping us, is our hearts. Like, we have some hard parts, and asking for that to be softened and doing what it takes to clear your heart and make it open for communion with your heavenly parents is life-changing for you, and it will be for your children and generations to come. And I really feel strongly about that. I think it's that willing heart. Once again, I keep bringing it up, but it's really on my mind. It's that it just clears the way for Christ to be in all aspects of our life, which is nothing better. The peace of heaven is the greatest thing.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you for coming on the show. I would point everyone to the Men Who Love God podcast. If you implement that into a weekly routine of listening to it, you'll be nothing but blessed. It's incredibly beneficial and interesting too, the fact that it is, as you say, non-denominational. I appreciate that aspect of it, and it enriches it even more. And I would say to listeners, Eric and I aren't perfect, and some of the topics that we've touched on are unpopular in mainstream society, perhaps, and I pray that you will forgive us as we explore these nuances, but they are important to discuss. And if we can have the assurance that people will be forgiving as they watch and join in the conversation, then it's much easier to have, isn't it? So
I second that. Thank you. It's an
amazing
honor to be here.
It's an honor for me to have you, Eric. Thank you, and have a great day.
All right. Thanks, brother.
Thanks for watching For All the Saints. This show needs your help to grow. Please like the video, comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone you think would enjoy it. Thank you.